So I want to talk about the recent video I made of Genesis 40. Up to now, I've just sort of been trying the old school approach of talking and using basic slides or images while telling you a story. And I thought the video before that, I kind of dropped the ball or the bomb about what Genesis really is and what I think the Bible really is. And then you get this moment. So a month ago, I was just a quiet weirdo in my own little world, and I could think whatever I wanted, and it didn't really matter. But once I decided that I need to share this, well, now I'm opening myself up for your opinions, which is fine. It's just, and I realize that things of this nature require an explanation. It's hard to just say kind of outlandish things and then expect people to care and then not really fill in the blanks. So I want to kind of fill in the blanks with my little, it's a short, I don't know, what is it, 3 or 4 minutes of just. So what I did is after I said those things about Genesis, I thought, well, I need to maybe give somebody some receipts of something far enough in history where it's sort of uncomfortable. So I didn't really plan on Genesis 40. I just sort of threw it together in the last couple of days and just Hail Married it out there. And I thought, well, let's see how this works. Ironically, at first I thought, I'm going to try my hand at AI. I'm going to get AI images and figure out how to throw those in a video editing thing and do an AI voice. And I don't know if you've played with AI, but the images it makes, at least on the level of money I was willing to spend, which is nothing, they're not good. And then I realized that you have to prompt this thing really hard in order for it to make anything. So then you realize that I have to prompt it about one story while trying to tell a different and I thought we're going to skip the middleman and just go straight for just old school quick shots of pre-existing things. And I did use AI voices though. That man's name was Joseph, which I thought was great. So I dropped this Genesis 40 and I thought, well, let's see what happens. Let's see if it makes sense to you. And I have no idea. I'm not actually very big. I sort of just pretend like I have any viewers, and maybe one day I will. If not, this is more of I've noticed that the more I do this, it makes sense to me, but it makes so much more sense. And what is that old saying? Like, if you want to truly understand something, teach it. And that is very true. So if I'm going to make a fool of myself, I thought, well, we could just mumble a bunch, or we could, like verbally, like this, fumble around and ah my way through an explanation of things with my awkward long pauses, or I could fumble my way through visually stimulated images that in my mind are 100% directly related to what the story is, and then see if connections are made besides my own brain, which, who knows, we'll find out. But it's there, right? Go look up Genesis 40 and it will show you the video, and it's just only the words of Genesis 40 with the accompanying video. And but what I feel like might help is I did put in a description like what I thought were the big points, but if you're like me, I probably never read a description in any video on any platform for any reason ever. So I have to assume that nobody's doing that. But it's there if you want further explanation. It is there. But let's just break down what was going on. So Genesis 40 begins with the verse, "It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while." Now that begins with the phrase, "It came to pass after these things." So in the video, I begin with kind of a panning shot of the Palace of Versailles, which is the palace of the King of France. And so the question would become, after which things are we referring to, and why is it that I would choose to make a... Ooh, let's see. If you believe, if you just go by standard historical understandings, then the story of Joseph would put you at least 3,500 years ago, if not 4,000 years ago. And I'm being a rather cheeky boy and saying it's 250 to 300 years ago, which that's a major social faux pas, and I'm going to lose my country club membership over this. But it came to pass after these things. So if we just went back, it's talking about how Joseph was a slave, and then Potiphar's wife had tried to seduce him, and he got thrown in jail for attempted rape. And then right before that is this random story of Judah and Tamar, because right before that you have Joseph dreaming of greatness in his fancy coat, and then his brother saying, "Yeah, screw that," and selling him into slavery, where he was shipped off to Egypt. So something I've never heard before is, why would the Bible choose to tell you a story about Joseph and his coat and his brother's jealousy and his being sold into slavery, and then go into a story about Judah with no mention of Joseph, hiring a prostitute and his three sons, of the wife of his three sons, who couldn't seem to get the job done, and then immediately go to Joseph again? So that, I told you there's a lot of weird things in the Bible. That's a big one. Now, what you don't know is I've spent the last month just dissecting the hell out of Genesis 38, because I was intrigued and I thought this story must mean something pretty important for them, and it must be related to the overall story, or somebody's been drinking on the job and they really should have deleted this a long time ago. But they didn't delete it, and they probably weren't drinking on the job. So that one is fascinating story that is 100% related to the other Joseph stories. Unfortunately, we're not talking about those. We're talking about Genesis 40. So, what I am suggesting, just to kind of place, if I told you that Genesis is a condensed version of Western history, well, then we're in 40, and I know I thought about starting in order, and I thought I'm just going to lose my 7 audience members if I go start to finish, because it's a long way to go. So we're just kind of jumping around and hitting and missing. You guys aren't following this in order probably anyway, so it doesn't matter. But the first 10, 11 and a half chapters is Sumer Akkad, and the very, right before you get to right around 2000 BC. So from 10-ish to 40-ish is up to what I am suggesting would be around late 1700s. So what is that? Almost 4,000 years in those 30 chapters, which is exactly what I believe it is. But this one, so this I'm saying is the French Revolution. Only, I guess I should take the time to sort of, I've said I have no idea how this works. And I have no idea how this works. At first I thought, well, maybe it's a miracle. And it might actually be. So here's, to any of you actually watching this, here's what I've noticed about the world. A good chunk of people will tell you about God and tell you how much they believe in God and religion and miracles and things like that, but yet none of them actually seem to believe in any of it. I mean, they believe in it, but if you were to like push most of them, people are happy to entertain aliens and ghosts in the news, right? They're more than happy to believe stories that have been historically proven to be non-literal, like it's just a proof at this point. But if I point this out, they get real squirmy because it's actually miraculous, and it's kind of irrational, and it's a little unsettling, right? How in the hell, if this is true, Genesis, from what I've looked into this like a crazy person, like how far back can you prove the book of Genesis, right? You can have, I believe the Jewish people will use it, and they'll say that it's from, David alone is supposedly 1900 BC, and then Abraham. So I think they go back 4,000 years. So hypothetically, this is a 4. But if you get into the actual scholarly, here's a piece of something with Genesis written on it, it is nowhere near 4,000 years. But it is definitely near. I mean, they definitely have Dead Sea Scrolls of, but what is that? That's 180. Maybe they can push that back to 150, maybe 200, not 80 BC. So maybe 2,200 years proven. So if you can have a book that is proven, well, heck, you can go late date and say 280. So an 1,800-year-old document that is somehow talking about the future. Now, everybody's okay with that if it's the book of Revelation, right? That's fine. But you can't, you know, you're out of line, sir. How in the world? This is clearly, you can't have a book talking about the future when it is the book that much of the past is based on. It makes for, it's like trying to do Back to the Future math. Like your head will just, I'm gonna somehow wipe myself out of existence. But I'm okay with this. So I guess we should start with just the first verse again. Let's just look at it again. Now Joseph, and I've been stating this like a broken record, Joseph is a man are countries, or at least people groups, and in his particular case, he represents in this particular form, because the other thing that you can say about groups of people is they're sort of potentially transitory. So I know it's like violating rules, but there is the ability for it to, like Joseph, to move. So we haven't even remotely gotten into this, but when he is initially his multi-coded favorite son of Jacob, with his, and the only one of only two sons of Rachel, he represents the Holy Roman Empire. And trust me, you will become best friends with the Holy Roman Empire. But then in the early 1600s, you have something called the 30 Years' War, which basically decimated the population of Germany and destroyed whatever greatness was the Holy Roman Empire. It didn't end it, it just ended its importance. And it's at that moment that Joseph, and this is what is really, 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 really shown in the Judah Tamar story, is essentially the betrayal of the Holy Roman Empire and Austria via the Habsburgs' attempt at some form of global world hegemony. And I can be honest with you, I had no idea about the Habsburgs, and holy shit. That's all I can say about that. We'll get into that. But then when Joseph is sold by his brothers, I mean, essentially the 30 Years' War was an attempt to bring down the Holy Roman Empire, who at that time, through Maximilian and some others, were getting a little, they were kind of losing the plot of what they were supposed to be doing. And anyways, it essentially destroyed that. And if you think of Joseph not as just the country, but the people, right? So the people of that area, they were different. There's a difference of those people, but they ended up being a huge. It was the Protestants that did much of the boat getting awning during the colonial moments of European history. And it was the Protestant areas that did much of the Enlightenment, especially the German Enlightenment. Like it was Protestantism that bucked the system of the stagnant old Catholic Church. Right? One could argue that was a lot of what the fighting was back in those days. And so it's these people, these sort of freedom-minded, pig-headed Protestant people were the ones that were indentured over into into the New World as it was discovered around this time. So Joseph now becomes these new colonists in the American colonies, is what I'm essentially saying Joseph is, and how he can go from Germany to America and still be the same person. So it's an interesting play. The other thing to and I believe I wrote this in the description, is it also represents democracy. So I don't want to say too much and we haven't even got down to verse 2, but there's an element of democracy in Egypt and in Joseph, but they're not democracy, but there's an element of it. So if you think about democracy, especially in Europe, which is where it comes from as a revival Greek Roman, right? It was an attempt to revive these Greek and Roman things, and so it was purely Western. So in the New World, the whole, in many ways, Joseph not wanting to sleep with Potiphar's wife represents a refutation of Potiphar's wife. And so who would be the belief system of Potiphar, and who is Potiphar, and who is Pharaoh, and what does Pharaoh mean? And so it's a lot. So Joseph represents this form of democracy in Egypt, more specifically, because if you follow the rest of Genesis, then you start to notice that everybody starts to go to Egypt. But strangely, if you look up what Egypt means tribulation. So all you Revelations people should stand up and take note of that. To go to Egypt means to go to tribulation. But the tribulation only really begins with the rise of democratic republics. And the rise of democratic republics begin in 3 places. I would say the first one was the War of the Roses and the execution of Charles I, and then the reinstatement of Charles II of England, right? And then you have like limited monarchy and a parliamentary system beginning to occur. And that's a key to understanding Pharaoh, because then it's that parliamentary system that sort of births a deeper yearning for throwing the yoke off of the people to be self-governed. And that's what the United States was. The United States was an attempt to reproduce like a Greek city-state, Roman Republic, Holy Roman Empire-esque patch quilt, 2,000 individual fiefdoms, kingdoms, free cities, right? So these independent places all under the umbrella of a single empire. And that's what, so the United States was never supposed to be one country, but 50 countries. And instead of having a king, it had an agreement and a constitution and an upgraded parliamentary system. So Egypt and Joseph inhabit those because they left Israel. And Israel, if you go back and if you go read the rest of Genesis, like when Jacob's other sons go to Joseph and eat with him, Joseph he he recommends that they don't tell Pharaoh that they're shepherds, because the Egyptians don't like shepherds. And so shepherds is kind of a code word for king. And if we go back even to the Cain and Abel story, the shepherd was the good king. So, yeah, there's that. And then it says, so Joseph had been, here we go. So Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, no, wrong one. And it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord. So it came after Joseph was arrested and thrown into jail. And this is one of those words. I keep saying there's words. And once you understand the word, it's like learning a language. Once you know this word, I'm not making this up. It doesn't feel like that, because you can go, oh, well, that word means this and this word means this. And when you add them together, it just means the story. So there are 2, 3 words that I know of that mean war. That means a nation is in war. So one phrase is when somebody is arrested. That means that country is now at war. That's one. When a country is kissed or embraced, that's war. And when they meet in the field, that's war. So I'm not sure if there's, I haven't gotten deep enough where I'm not sure if there's if one is like attacked and one is, like, I'm not sure why there's 3 words, but there's 3 words. So Joseph was arrested for refusing Potiphar's wife and accused of rape. And that's a different chapter, and we can go into that. But if you just think, again, if you saw any of the introduction videos, I said you need history, Bible knowledge, like an appreciation of the esoteric, appreciation of ancient cultures and religions, and an ability to abstract your thoughts. So if you thought critically about what the Revolutionary War was, well, George Washington was a rich man because his dad was a rich man, and his dad was a rich man because his father was in league with several of these corporate charters. I think there was like the Ohio Company, and I don't know, I was looking into the other. There was quite a few companies that he was invested in. So these, like, America was essentially founded as a corporation for investors to grow things and sell them for profit. So the founding fathers didn't get rid of that. They just took over that territory and kicked out the old leader, England, and just replaced themselves for that, and continued to do corporatism, essentially. Like, if anything, the U.S. is corporatism. So I would say, in addition to democracy, and maybe democracy is an open door for corporations, because corporations would prefer it if they were the pharaoh, the head. They just didn't have to do all the work, and they left it to Joseph the people, because Pharaoh let Joseph be in charge. And so there's something to that. So when it says, it came to pass that the butler and the baker and the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. So if Egypt means tribulation, and it means democracy, and it means corporation, the king of Egypt officially means the sun. It means the sun. And the king of Egypt, or more importantly, Pharaoh was based on a couple of things, but if we're going to have to at some point study ancient Egyptian religion, because it is not possible to understand the Bible if you don't understand certain, you can call them pagan religions, like the Egyptian religion, the Greek religions, the mystery religions, Roman myth. Like, if you don't understand mythology, you don't understand the Bible. You just don't. It's not, because the people that wrote this lived in a world not full of Christians worshiping at the old Winn-Dixie that's been converted to a church singing songs, but they were surrounded by mystery cults and temples to pantheons and just a different mindset. And so they were incorporating a new thing, but you had to know the old thing to fully get the new thing. So Pharaoh, you could say, is equated to two Egyptian gods. And the reason it's two is because you had the north and the south. So on one end, you had the god Ptah. And on the other end, you had Osiris. And at some point, Egypt likes to merge these, and then you get like Osiris Ptah, and there was another one thrown in there, and they just sort of blend into this super god. And if you look up who they are, Ptah is like a god of craftsmen and architects and things of that nature, which should be ringing some bells. And we'll just call it Freemasonry, which we've already seen associated with Cain and Tubal-Cain and these stories throughout. And Osiris is associated with being the god of the dead. And I had tried saying before that to be dead meant to be a corpse, and a corpse is the definition of a corporation. It's the anti-version of what I'm saying. I'm saying a country is a man. It's a man named Joseph. So we're speaking about an entire group of people as one brand name called Joseph. Just like Nike or Apple or Google, we're speaking about an entire corporation full of thousands of people with multiple different aspects as Nike. And Nike just, it has a symbol and it has a philosophy and it means, and they make a certain thing. You just know Nike, even though Nike is not a person. It is a dead person, if you look it up, legally speaking. So that's the opposite of a living person. So a corporation is a dead person. And we're not just talking about any dead person. We're talking about the king of the dead is Pharaoh. So then the question becomes, in 17, whatever this is, let's call it 1700 to 1800, because you're moving over a large swath of time in a tiny 5-paragraph thing. Who is the king of corporations? And that's who Pharaoh is. And how does that king of corporations correspond with the American colonies? And that's who Pharaoh is. And how would that relate to what I claim is France? And that's who corporations is. So Pharaoh is, in my contention, just like all the other men, Pharaoh represents the East India British Corporation, which if you spend any time looking, they'll say it was the world's greatest monopoly that basically became this globally dominant force that created the British Empire, if you will. So the British Empire was the empire almost existed more for the benefit of the corporation than the corporation for the empire. And that would be who Potiphar is. So, like if you went back a story, Potiphar would represent the captain of the guard of the corporation of the East India Corporation. So, in many ways, Potiphar would represent the actual British people who worked for the company. And they were in charge of the house that Joseph was sold into. And their lord, Pharaoh, the corporation, the bankers, who collectively join resources to create a single dead entity, they were pissed at France. And that's who this is referring to when it says that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord. So they also had a lord corporation, and he was offended because they were doing something that was getting in the way of making money. So when you see baker and butler, now we're getting into bread and wine. And I don't think we've officially talked about bread and wine. So let's do this. Let's see. If water is knowledge, and men are countries and women are cultures, then the product of the man is bread. So a baker is the head of the bread making. He's the head of the people. And the butler, the cupbearer, and I was like, man, I need to go back and add to my Sargon of Akkad thing, because he was the chief cupbearer. And if you could just follow the innuendos, you could see where this is going. The chief cupbearer, the chief butler, the head of the dispensary of the culture, but not of the people, but of the head people. So I told you Pharaoh meant the sun, and the Pharaoh meant the sun, but the king in charge of France before, so for a minute France was on the rise and they were looking like the global dominant superpower. And the man that was bringing them there was a man called Louis XIV. And he's the one that really took Versailles and built it into the thing that the place that I started the video with, to finally get back to that. In fact, he was the one I was representing in the first 3 or 4 shots. Is kind of first it was a statue of Louis XIV, and then it was like an older Louis XIV, and then it showed just like a little image of Louis XIV, and right next to it it said, the Sun King. Now we just said Pharaoh means the sun. So at one point in European history, in fact for about 200 years in European history, you had this in fact, to all you people who are very anti-Western culture because slavery, colonialism, and European empire, that might have been the least European thing of all time. So that's corporatism. The global expansion, the slave trade, all of that, slaves were not legal for the most part. Slavery almost didn't exist. You did not have a slave trade in Europe. There would have been an uprising of the people. slavery was brought to the New World because it was not the Old World and they could get away with it. So it's these corporations. It starts with what? The Dutch East India Corporation? No, I would say, let's say the Portuguese, and then the Dutch, and then the French, and then the British just figure out how to take over the whole thing. And then by now, the whole world is run by corporations. And the blood had turned in, and the sea had turned into the blood of a dead man. So to get back to the chief baker, chief butler thing, what I'm trying to say is, it's the chief, it's the head of the French people and the head of the French belief. And so the head of the French people at this time is Louis XVI, the great grandson of the Sun King, and the head baker, and you're just going to have to believe me until we can spend more time on this, is something called French Freemasonry. And I love, in fact, I might just make a video only about Versailles. And once you see it, he didn't call himself the Sun King for no reason. And the esoteric symbology of his garden is quite something. So there's a vibe for globalism, and that is also what the story of Judah and Tamar is who gets to be Pharaoh. So I believe this story tells you who wins, because you can see that the chief butler and baker were thrown in prison with Joseph, which means they too are now in tribulation. And the story essentially is just talking about how the butler and the baker each had dreams. And then if you look at the sequence that I did in the video, I throw up some Freemasonic symbology and a little bit of the French Revolution symbology and some images of some Jacobins, and how the people and the culture were beginning to become at odds in France around the time of the American Revolution. So George Washington became, besides being the grand whatever, he was the head of American Freemasonry. But in addition to that, the reason he got to be general is because his war experience during what we call the French and Indian War, right? And he'd been in some battles, and he'd led some troops, and he had gotten captured, and he'd gotten wounded. And George Washington was a war veteran that was then called up, and he was a pretty influential member of many corporate houses, and affluent and rich and well versed in the ways of Pharaoh. But the French and Indian War was something. It was like a piece of a world war. So sometimes it's referred to as the First World War, sometimes other wars are, but it was basically two sides vying for Pharaoh, if you will, for the king of the dead to become the head corporation. It's not how it's described, but that's what it was. It was basically over the trading places. So the American colonies and the Indian colonies and some of the Asian colonies and within Europe itself. And if you just look at so there's two opposing dreams by these two forces of France. And there's so much in there. Believe it or not, I'm holding a lot back. So a lot of what the video is Joseph listening to the dreams, and he says things, and they say things like, the chief butler told a dream to Pharaoh and said, in my dream was a vine was before me, and then the vine were 3 branches, and it budded and blossomed, and the Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and how he pressed them and put the grapes back into Pharaoh's cup. And so this is where in the video I show Dionysus. And I told you, if you don't understand ancient beliefs, you're just not. Dionysus is like, if you want to understand the world, you need to learn Egyptian, the Osiris, Horus, Isis myth. You need to know that like you know any Bible story. And you need to know about Apollo and Dionysus, the Orphics, and the mysteries of Eleusis. Like, those are on, and probably Mithraism. So Dionysus is key to this story for several reasons. If you just Google French Revolution Illuminati, and then it starts talking about how conspiracy theories were invented with the idea that the German Bavarian Illuminati were responsible for the French Revolution, and they secretly, through bankers like the Rothschilds and their henchmen like Adam Weishaupt, fomented revolution in order to bring down monarchies and establish republican rule and change the dynamic of European, whatever you want to call that, power to gain control. And then smart, rational, intelligent people will say things like, idiots, dummies, everything's a conspiracy. How could people in Germany have anything to... There's no proof that they had it. But then there are dozens of old... I've read them. Like guys that lived in, say, 1790 wrote papers about the Illuminati being responsible for the French Revolution. And there's a story about a member of the Bavarian Illuminati was riding through some town in Germany, and he was struck by lightning. And local town soldiers, on inspecting his corpse, found in his sack letters from the Illuminati to other members about how they were fomenting revolution in Europe, and this was sent to all the kings and leaders of Europe to warn them, and none of them noticed. And are any of these things true? I don't know. They're almost unimportant. But Dionysus, and Adam Weishaupt, if you got into his 3 or 4, I think there was like 4 levels of the Illuminati officially, and he would make you study extensively the mysteries of Dionysus. And it's the mysteries of Dionysus that form the heart of the Orphic mysteries. And the Orphic mysteries they're worth your time if you could figure it out. It's a mystery. But the center of the Dionysian cult is Dionysus always rides into town on a donkey. That'll come up again. You might want to keep that one there. He brings his wine, they have a party, and then his followers rip his body apart and eat it. and then he is reborn the next day or later as a new thing. So the Dionysian, and I will say, from the best I can tell, there does appear to be a left. The Jacobins do seem to be a precursor of socialism, communism, progressivism. There does seem to be a vein over here. And so it almost seems like your left-right dichotomies are in fact an Apollonic Dionysian left-right thing, which gets into your Egyptian Osiris Set. And they go to war, and there's death and rebirth, and at the end, your Eye of Horus, your risen new son of God, comes out of the fall of Osiris and the brief and chaotic reign of Set. Your very rational, organized, Apollonic world crumbles to a chaotic Dionysian world. And Nietzsche spent a lot of time on this. Go look him up. And so there does appear to be this wish on both parties, whether you're the royal people, like the King of France, the Sun King especially, seemed rather interested in Apollo. In fact, if you go to look at a map of the gardens of Versailles, you have two roads, and they kind of meet at the end at the Fountain of Apollo. Apollo was the sun. Apollo, we'll leave it there, who Apollo is and what he represents, but that's one aspect. And so to get to that end, you had to go through this little strip, and it's just like this, the tree of life, the Sephiroth, I believe it's called. There's a place of death that you have to go through until the rebirth, and there's a whole world of Freemasonic things that you can get into that they appear to be quite, I believe the number that I saw for, if you took Versailles and the amount of money he spent to build it was something like, it's either 20 billion or 200, but it was an absurd amount of money. So whatever it was like pretty important to him. So if you went through these rituals and these rites, then you believed and you built. Elites have vision. They have dreams. And in the story of Joseph, Joseph is constantly running into men with dreams. Constantly running into men with dreams. Pharaoh had a dream. The butler had a dream. The baker had a dream. He's always interpreting somebody's dream. Joseph had a dream. So visionary men have dreams. And then they need to be acted out on the world or interpreted by the people they're being performed on. So the butler, the Freemasonic belief system, told its vision, its Dionysian vision of how the old body is about to be torn apart and this new body will come back, right? That's sort of what Dionysus represents, is the death and rebirth, usually through the chaotic act of tearing and consuming flesh, which sounds an awful lot like revolution and revolt, and there's some blood drinking, and it's a messy affair. Now, if you got into the actual mysteries, they tend to get kind of, at least if you study them. I've never been invited to any, and I don't think I'd want to go, but that almost seems more like you'd see in Eyes Wide Shut, where you'd have sex parties and orgies, and like there's a little bit of carnalness that Dionysus or Bacchus would bring, right? He's a merry-making wine god. He's not a stiff upper Apollo god. So there is some of that on both ends. But I found it fascinating that there's a verse and it says, so Joseph and they each had a dream. We each have a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. There's two competing forces here. There is a fomenting cultural revolution within France after the 7 Years' the 7 Years' War bankrupted France, in addition to the building of Versailles, in addition to the fact that Louis XVI was not Louis XIV, and he tended to be a little bit of a man-child and just sort of didn't inspire the people. So the people were getting a little restless. They have a dream. The king has a dream. He wants to be the global power. But the people, this Freemasonic, these intellectual elite have another dream, and they're dreaming of republics. They're dreaming the Jacobin dream. They're dreaming, why don't we do what the English did 100 years ago? Why don't we do what America just did? But let's do it slightly different, right? There's this liberty, equality, fraternity, no king. And then Joseph says, and it says, we each had a dream, and there's no interpreter, and do not interpretations belong to God. And I've been saying God is the spirit of humanity. It's the people's will, and sometimes that goes. So God will figure out which one of these two dreams comes true. And then the rest of the interpretation goes on to say, hey, Butler, you will be saved. You'll be raised back up. And you will continue to work for Pharaoh. Hey, Baker, bad news. The birds will eat everything out of the baskets on your head, and then your head will be lifted up, and you will be hung. Well, your head will be taken off, and you'll be hung on a tree. Something. And basically, the dream is saying, this old, and when I say Freemasonic, before I get there, so the king will be replaced with a new leader, and this new leader will definitely work for Pharaoh. And then at the end of the chapter, it says all these things happened, and it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, and we'll get into that in just a second. He restored the chief butler, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker. They cut off Louis XVI's head. But this new butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And if you remember what I was saying about democracy, in the video I show you Napoleon crowning himself emperor at this exact moment, because the irony is the French Revolution was intended to be like a French version of democracy, only they went kind of like full Maoist, Stalinist level murderer. Like it just was like it's called the Reign of Terror, not because it was fun, but this people's movement of the Jacobins and the French Revolution ironically ended in the rise of the largest European dictator emperorship since Rome. So Joseph, representing democracy, he was forgotten, and the emperor took over. So I thought that was fascinating. But what I was going to say about Freemasonry, when I say the word Freemasonry, there's a whole lot that happens there. But let's pretend you're a Freemason, which I am not. Until I'd say the last 50 years, it seems to be not nearly anything. It's just a bunch of slightly upper middle class rednecks hanging out, drinking at a place, helping out kids from time to like the bite, the draw and the attraction seems to have diminished from what it used to be. If you lurk in antique stores like I do, or go looking into the past like I do, and this is an irony of many reasons. Number one, people who ridicule conspiracy theorists are always like, well, everything's a conspiracy. And yet, literally everything's a conspiracy. It's just the theory of the conspiracy is and that word itself was invented by the CIA. And that's not a conspiracy theory. So, if you were a member of a secret group, which any self-respecting middle class to wealthy man of the day, you were part of some fraternal order. They met in secret. They had secret little rituals that bonded them. They had secret goals. They were bound by oaths. I mean, this could be anywhere from the Rosicrucians. In fact, one of the ironic twists of reading about how to say the Illuminati was involved in the French Revolution is silly, is because other secret societies like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits would have stopped them. I'm like, well, that's so many conspiracies at one time. So the world is conspiratorial. Just go work in an office for a week. It's conspiratorial on every boring level. So, yes, there are conspiracies. Like, to say there's no conspiracies makes you a fucking idiot. You're a fucking moron who doesn't need to be speaking if you don't see that. So, however, in those same fucking idiots' defense, I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in the giant conspiracy. Now, I'm not even saying there isn't one. What I'm saying is most likely, like, Jordan Peterson has some amazing talks. In fact, he did one with Michael Malice, and it's like next level understanding of how this works. Because they both sort of obsess over rise of left, like communism in particular, and how often that is just utilitarian utopianism played out. And in fact, I would say that might be a good chunk of the story of Cain and Abel. It's the story of it's the story of today. Is it a country rises to power through powerful, beautiful leaders who rally the people in the cause of truth and justice and righteousness, and they create a better world, and they help destroy an old worse world. And they're often flawed men, but their motives, like, there's so many great heroes of history. But then hero has a kid, and that guy has a kid, and the heroics are gone, and then you start getting, how do I put this? Technocrats. The enemy of humanity is technocracy. Is a group of detached elites who think they know how to make a better world when they don't even know how to wipe their ass. So you get, and their moral code is not based on like simple, like a simple man with the Bible, while he might be misled about the literalness, he is genuine about his overall goodness and probably love of people, right? That you can't fake that. So the average religion, like the average Muslim, if you've met them, the average Muslim is just trying to do the right thing. But if you like talk about Islam in general, it gets as sketchy as Catholicism. But the average Catholic, what is that, like a South American man, or even better, like a lady named Maria from Uruguay. Like, she's a good-hearted person who loves her family and wants and probably would give you all the food you needed. Like, that's a good person, and she believes in goodness. She doesn't really think about things, but guys who think about things have conversations in their head like, well, morality is relative, so if I kill 100 people to create a better world where more people eat and I save millions of people, then yeah, I'll blow up a building or whatever I gotta do. So their ability to do evil in the name of good is outstanding. So a man like, the Trotskyites or Lenin, they go on bloodlust, but they do it in the name of utopia. So if you want to know about conspiracy, or like the Illuminati or the free, like all those people are educated, rich people willing to have conversations like that, where they believe the power would be best served in the hands of a small group of intelligent men who really know how to do this thing right. And the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst are your college professors. And if you really want to know who the Illuminati is, well, hell, it was started by a college professor. If you want to go find out who Antifa really is, it's college professors. If you really want to see what progressives were, it's Woodrow Wilson, a college professor. It's Barack Obama, a college professor. It's the educated. In the old days, they would have been called priests. And so Cain and your butlers know better than you, and they're willing to have a Dionysian feast on society in order to get a new world, and they feel like it's justified. So that's what this story is. It's the story of the French Revolution. Joseph went to the butler and the baker, right? France helped America. And it was because France helped America achieve democracy. That's what really Pharaoh is pissed off about. Like, France didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They did it out of greed and power desires. They wanted to be Pharaoh, but that's not how this works. So Pharaoh was angry and had them in jail. He took them to tribulation, where Joseph was. And at the end of it, they got rid of the king, but kept on that old religion, which we'll just call technocracy. And how did that technocracy end? It ended with a brand new Sargon of Akkad coming out of left field and just fucking shit up. And when he forgot Joseph, The story makes it sound like a bad thing, but Joseph is in Egypt begging to get out. But France, for a brief moment, under Napoleon, who loved his people, right? As he's this flawed character, but if you were you did so much better as a person, as a regular human, not some elite, as a person, your life under Napoleon would have been miles better than under the Louis overtaxed, kind of shooting for the stars, but just not up to the challenge, right? And that's why the people were kind of resentful and ready for a revolution. And then what do you get? You get hell on earth. The reign of terror was so much worse than whatever thing they had under the king. So they got a new king for a brief moment, and they say Napoleon, more books have been written about Napoleon than any other person. I don't know if that's true, but I felt like I read that. So, if you took this, whatever this ends up being, an hour of me rambling on about this stuff, and then you rewatch that video and rethink about what it is I'm saying, you can see. Otherwise, let's be honest, this particular chapter is a weird chapter, and it corresponds to absolutely no actual historical place anywhere else. Like, there is no ancient Egyptian version of this that makes sense, right? So it's either just a myth, or historians are delusional, or it's a mythicized story of a history that hadn't happened when it was written. And that's kind of where we started. If that's true, you are personally experiencing, like, if you can see it, right? It's not just some schizophrenic episode some random dude on YouTube is making, but you can actually see this. And you realize, worst case scenario, this thing was written 100 BC. And I haven't even I will just go dook, 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 dook until we get to chapter 50. And it just lines up like a history book. It's just, it doesn't say it out loud, right? It's not literal. It's hidden. And the question is, and this is where it's fascinating, did the author hide it? Or did the author just write a story not realizing he was writing history of the future? Like, it's almost more interesting if the person that wrote it had no idea what they were doing. Like, they thought they were writing one story, but then because once you put this all together, what the actual fuck? And I still have no answers. It's interesting and exciting. So, hopefully that's something. So, I need to add a couple things real quick. One is, let's take a look again. It says, now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. Now, in the video, it's the part where the guy talking stops. And what I'm attempting to show you is, if you Google birthday of Osiris, two things come up. One is they throw him into the pool of December 25th candidates, and he's one of the savior gods. Or, especially for some reason in witchcraft and paganism, I haven't quite figured this out, you celebrate, it's like a week of Egyptian celebrations, but always on July 14th, you wish Osiris happy birthday. And then if you look up Bastille Day, and Bastille Day is considered the start of the French Revolution. It is July 14th, just like Osiris's birthday. And then if you go back to what I was saying about Pharaoh at the beginning of this video, Pharaoh represents the dead, the king of the dead. So on the birthday of the king of the dead, Osiris, is the day that all of these things transpire that Joseph interpreted. And in fact, the butler is restored and the baker is dethroned on the birthday of Osiris, the king of the dead, Pharaoh. And then just to sort of throw this in, because I think I missed it, is Napoleon is constantly shown with his hand in his waist jacket. And it's well known, if you study even just a little bit, that he was a very devout Freemason. Like, he definitely passed the torch. Pharaoh stayed in charge with him. And that's why in the video there's a little image, there's a couple images of him, one in a Freemasonic pose and one with him with a Freemasonic quote. So if you're not sure, just go look it up and you will not be disappointed. So just another little piece of what I'm trying to explain in the video.